On the outside, we were perfect. The kind of couple neighbors admired you and Daniel are such a beautiful pair, they'd say. I'd smile, nod, maybe even blush. But inside, I was always bracing for the storm I knew was there, quietly rumbling beneath the surface. We met in college. He was magnetic, confident, charming, the kind of man who didn't need to speak loudly to command a room. I was his opposite, quiet, bookish, the girl who laughed too hard at jokes that weren't that funny. He swept me up. Fast, so fast I never stopped to ask, is this real compatibility, or am I just in love with being loved? I was young, naive, just so grateful to be chosen by someone like him. That feeling was intoxicating. 8 years later. We had the kind of life people envy. A cozy home, steady jobs, to cars, annual vacations, and smiles. Always smiles for the camera, for friends, for show. But behind all that, I was fading. I felt emotionally invisible, like I was slowly disappearing in my own home. Daniel hadn't been cruel. He had been polite, present in the ways that checked boxes. He did chores, remembered birthdays, kissed me goodbye each morning. But everything was mechanical, hollow. It felt like living in a showroom. Everything staged. Everything dead, then lockdown hit. And suddenly we were stuck in the same space, no more distractions. That's when the silence got loud. He spent all day in his home office, door closed. I kept myself busy, or tried to. More often, I'd find myself sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor, wondering, how did I get so lonely while sharing a life with someone? When I tried to talk to him, he'd smile faintly and say, "You're overthinking again, Anna." That phrase began to haunt me. Then came Julian. He was the younger brother of one of Daniel's college friends. We met at a barbecue. Tall, soft-spoken, grounded in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. We barely spoke, but something stuck after that handshake, a quiet warmth I hadn't felt in years. Weeks later, he followed me on Instagram. We started liking each other's posts. Then, a few messages. It felt harmless, but when someone really listens to you, when you've been emotionally starving, it feels like oxygen after years of holding your breath. I found myself looking forward to his name on my screen, smiling when I saw it. Suddenly, I noticed how deeply I had been craving attention, validation, connection just to feel like I still mattered. We never mentioned Daniel. Julian didn't ask, and I didn't offer. Part of me felt guilty. But another part, the one that had gone unheard for years, felt justified. Daniel had left me long before Julian arrived. At first, it was just coffee, then lunch. I told myself it was still innocent. But deep down, I knew I was crossing a line. Still, the time with Julian reminded me what I was missing. He noticed the little things, the way I bite my nails when I'm nervous, how I tuck my hair behind my ear when I'm thinking. He remembered what I said. With him, I felt seen. I wish I could say I fell in love with him. But it wasn't that. It was something else, something raw. A lifeline thrown into deep water. He didn't save me, but he reminded me I was still someone worth saving. Daniel never noticed. He's too wrapped up in his world. And I had perfected the art of pretending, smiling on cue. Keeping routines intact while inside I was unraveling. Then one night, everything shifted. Julian messaged me. "We need to talk." We met at our usual cafe. But he was different, tense, avoiding my eyes. "I think we should stop seeing each other," he said. Just like that, I asked why, calmly. He paused, then said, "Because it's not fair. Not to your husband, not to me. And not to you." I wasn't angry because he was wrong. I was angry because he had the privilege of walking away. He hadn't spent years shrinking himself for someone else. He hadn't woken up every day feeling like a ghost. That night, went home and watched Daniel sleeping, so peaceful, so unaware, as if none of it mattered. And maybe to him, it didn't. Maybe I had never been a partner, just a piece that fit neatly into his life. I didn't confront him, not yet. I needed to know what I felt first, and what I felt was rage. At him, at myself. For staying quiet so long, for mistaking endurance for love. So I began pulling away, quietly. No more waiting up, no more initiating conversation. I started reclaiming the pieces of myself, reading again, going out alone, spending time with people who didn't make me perform to be worthy. Eventually, he noticed. "You've been distant lately," he said. I looked at him, really looked. And all I could think was, where was this version of you when I needed you? "I'm just tired," I said. And I meant it. Not tired in my body. It's tired in my soul. Julian and I stopped talking completely. And no, I didn't feel relief. It's just a hollow quiet. Not because I missed him, but because he had been the mirror that showed me how lost I really was. And then something unexpected happened. Isla, my best friend, invited me for dinner. We laughed. We talked. We caught up. And for the first time in a long time, I started to remember who I used to be. Anything about Julian, I had kept that part of my life hidden even from her butt that night. She looked at me seriously and said, "I need to tell you something. I need to tell you something I'd next. It's about Daniel." She said quietly. My heart dropped. I asked her what she meant. He had messaged me, she confessed, a few months ago. Just flirty stuff at first. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but then it kept happening. I ignored him, but I thought, you should know my world stopped spinning. At first I thought I had misheard, but she showed me the message and there it was. Daniel, the man who treated me like background noise, sending late night texts to my best friend, compliments, questions about her relationship, comments about how she looked in certain photos. Nothing explicit, but the intent was clear. I sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, and then I laughed not because it was funny, but because it was so bitterly absurd. I had spent months feeling like the villain for stepping outside, the lines for wanting to feel alive again, and the whole time had been doing his own quiet betrayal behind the curtain. Something inside me shifted that night. The sadness turned into clarity. The guilt I had been carrying began to melt away, and in its place grew something stronger. Resolve. I didn't explode. I didn't confront him in a dramatic scene. Instead, I began making plans, quiet, deliberate, careful plans, because sometimes the best revenge is not destruction, it's liberation. After that night at Leela's, something inside me crystallized. The shame I had been carrying, the weight of all thought halves and shouldn't haves, began to dissolve for the first time in years. I felt something close to peace, not because things were resolved, but because I finally saw things clearly. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overthinking. I wasn't Theon Lee, one who had crossed lines. Daniel had been doing it. Two, just in a more calculated, quieter way. He had disrespected not only me, but the friendship I shared with Isla, assuming she would keep his secrets, or worse, participate in them. She didn't, and for that I was grateful, but it still hurt. It stung in places I hadn't even realized were wounded. For days I didn't say a word to Daniel. I wanted to scream, cry, accuse, demand, but I didn't. Becca's. I knew now that confrontation with him was useless. He would deny, twist, deflect. I had seen that pattern too, many times, so instead I began collecting small freedoms. I opened a separate bank account in my name. I met with a lawyer just for a consultation, I told myself. I needed to know my rights just in case. I went through old photos and started putting away the ones that made me feel like a stranger in my own story. Evan started journaling again, something I hadn't done since our first year of marriage. It helped a lot more than I expected. Meanwhile, Daniel seemed to sense something had shifted. He started making an effort, but it felt mechanical, like someone remembering lines in a play they hadn't rehearsed in years. Flowers, dinner reservations, small compliments. It all came too late, and it was too shallow. He was trying to fix cracks with paint, unaware that the foundation had already crumbled. Then one morning, I woke up and made a decision. I would leave, not in a blaze of drama, not with yelling or slammed doors, but with calm, quiet power. Wouldn't let him make me feel small anymore. I would walk out with dignity, but before I could take that final step, something unexpected happened. Anani's phone rang while he was in the shower. It lit up on the bedside table, and for once, it wasn't face down. I recognized the name. It was a woman. I'd never met in person, but I'd heard him mention her before. A coworker, he said friendly. Nothing more. Something inside me told me to look. I hesitated. Had always believed that. If you go looking for something, you should be prepared for what you might find. But off that moment, I already knew I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for confirmation. I opened the thread. There were messages. Going back months, photos flirty. Remarks, plans to meet up. He even talked about me, describing me as cold and emotionally distant, painting himself as the victim in our marriage. My hands trembled as I read them, not because I was shocked, but because it was all so cowardly, so predictable. When he stepped out of the shower, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. He froze. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I saw your messages, I said quietly. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. Don't. I'm not here for explanations. Just needed to see it with my own eyes, Anna. It's not what it looks like. Stop, I say it again. Please don't insult both of us. His face changed. He realized, then thought. He had no control over this moment, that whatever game he thought he was playing, it was over, and I was done. Bank. One who had to hold it all together while he played the misunderstood husband. He tried to defend himself, of course, said he was lonely, said he felt neglected, that he didn't mean for it to get that far. The usual lines. I listened in silence, it because I believed him, but because I needed to hear it to confirm just how far apart we had grown. His words didn't wound me anymore. They just sounded hollow after that. I began moving forward faster. He told him I needed space. I stayed with Isla for a few nights. I consulted LuvReal again, this time with real intent. I spoke to my HR department and asked about transferring to another city branch. I began packing during those days away from the house. I started thinking not about Daniel or even Julian, but about myself. Who was I before all this? What had I let go of? I realized that over the years I had made myself similar fit into someone else's comfort zone. I had trimmed away my edges, dulled my emotions, silenced my intuition, all in the name of keeping the peace. But what peace? Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of respect, of emotional safety, and I had lived without either for far too long. Daniel didn't fight me. He didn't beg me to stay. Maybe he was too ashamed, or maybe he didn't care enough to try. We agreed to separate. Quietly, discreetly, no drama. No public fallout, just a clean break. But I wasn't Dania. A few weeks later, I saw Julian again, not in person, just a post on social media. He had moved on. I felt a brief pang, but it passed. He had never promised me anything, was just a mirror in a very dark room. I didn't resent him anymore. In fact, I was thankful, because he reminded me that I still had light inside me, that I still mattered. Then came the moment that surprised even me. I invited Daniel's parents to cafe. It might sound strange, but they had always treated me kindly, and I wanted them to hear the truth, not from gossip, not from assumptions, but from me. We sat in a small cafe downtown, and I told them everything, not with bitterness, but with honesty. They were shocked, disappointed. Night in me, but in him we had no idea. His mother said, eyes welling up, you I was looked so happy together. Sometimes people look the happiest right before they fall apart. I said quietly. I left the cafe that day. I felt lighter. I had nothing left to hide, no more secrets, no more pretending. Then came the real turning point. A few months after the separation, I started mentoring at a local women's center, just once a week. But it gave me a sense of repose I hadn't felt in a long time. I met women from all walks of life, many of them carrying wounds much deeper than mine, and yet they were healing, building, finding themselves again. It reminded me that endings don't have to be tragic. They can be liberating. One day, while leaving the center, got a message from Isla. It was short, just a photo Daniel with another woman at a restaurant we used to go to. I stared at it for a moment and realized something incredible. I felt nothing, no anger, no jealousy, no pain, just peace. That's when I knew I was truly free not just from him, but from the version of myself I'd abandoned for too long months past. I didn't mark the calendar, I didn't count the days, I simply allow it time to move the way it wanted. And, Kai, I moved with it, sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully, but always forward and kneel, and I were officially separated now. The paperwork was done, no courtroom drama, no shouting, no messy public breakdown, just two people signing a chapter closed. He didn't fight me undoubtedly, that stung more than I expected. Part of me thought he might try harder, say something that would show he truly cared, but he didn't. And that, in the end, told me everything. My new life was simple. I rented a small flat with white walls and large windows that bathed the mornings in sunlight. It wasn't fancy. Boutet was mine. Every object inside had purpose and peace. No more pretending, no more walking on eggshells. I chose the curtains. I picked the flowers. I decided what music filled their room. Every small decision reminded me that I had a say again. One morning, as I was organizing a stack of old notebooks, I came across a folder I'd used years ago when I first started designing. It was full of rough sketches and notes for a creative project I once dreamed of: launching a sustainable stationery line with handwritten quotes. Recycled paper, watercolor textures, I had forgotten about it completely. My fingers trembled slightly as I flipped through those pages. That woman, the one who Doretto dream, who had ideas, who wanted to create something meaningful. Where had Jay gone? I smiled. She wasn't gone, just buried under years of compromiso. I decided to resurrect her. Within 2 weeks, I registered the name of my small venture, Unwritten Grace. I started small printing and assembling designs from homes, selling them online, sharing stories behind each product. It wasn't about money at first. It was about reclaiming something I had once lost, something. Daniel never knew how to nurture my identity. To my surprise, it began to grow slowly but steadily. People loved the authenticity, the softness, the personal touch. I even received a message from someone who said, "Your note cards helped me write something I was too afraid to say for years." That made me cry, because that was the kind of impact I always wanted to have. Not loud, not flashy, just deeply human and in the background. Daniel's life continued on. I didn't follow him. Dineska mutual friends didn't lurk on his social media, but things trickled in. People talk, especially when they don't realize they're feeding you the final puzzle pieces. Apparently, he started dating the woman from his office, the same one I'd seen on his messages, but their relationship didn't last. She left him after finding out she wasn't the only one. Typical. He was back on dating apps within weeks. Illa told me all this over coffee one afternoon, eyes cautiously watching me for a reaction. I just laughed gently. I didn't care anymore. I said, "I really don't." But then something poetic happened. I was invited to speak on a local podcast about women rebuilding their lives after toxic relationships. I said yes. Even though part of me was terrified. I wasn't used to telling my story out loud, not in a way that others would hear, but I didn't. I shared my truth with clarity and grace. No naming, no blaming, just facts and feelings. My journey, my mistakes, my healing. The episode went modus LuvReal. In our town, not massive, but enough for people to notice, enough for theory to circulate, including Daniel. He messaged me, of course. He did. It was a long, carefully worded paragraph that tried to sound thoughtful. He said he listened to the podcast and that it made him reflect deeply. He said he realized how much he had failed me, how much he had taken me for granted, and how he hoped I found the happiness he couldn't give me. I read the message twice then. I deleted it, no reply. That silence was my revenge, and it was beautiful bows. For once, I didn't need to say anything. My life spoke for me. He saw a woman rise from the ashes he helped create. Not by hurting him back, not by stooping to his level, but by healing. By building, by glowing in her own truth. That's the kind of revenge no man ever forgets. When you become everything they were too blind, too lazy, or too selfish to cherish. There were days when I still missed pieces of the past. Not Dana, but the illusion, the routine, the fake safety. But I reminded myself that comfort isn't same as peace. I didn't want a life that looked good in pictures. I wanted dawn that felt good in my soul. One evening, I was walking home from the small market when I bumped into a familiar face. Giuliani hadn't seen him since our last conversation. He looked surprised, but not uncomfortable, stood in silence for a moment, then smiled. Anna, he said softly, you look different. I am, I said, in the best way. We talked briefly, thing, emotional, just warmth and mutual understanding. He apologized for how things ended. I told him not to worry, that he had been a turning point, and for that I was grateful. Then he said something that stuck with me. You know, when I met you, I thought you were low spot. Now it's like you found your way home. I smiled. Yeah. I said, I finally have you. Parted ways that evening without promises or regrets, just to people who had intersected during a time of change. That was enough. That night I sat by my window, tea in hand, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. I felt peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I was no longer pretending, no more bending, no more erasing myself. For anyone's convenience, Daniel might have broken pieces of me, but I rebuilt them into something stronger, and unlike him, I didn't have to lie, cheat, or manipulate. Do it. All I had to do was remember who I was before the world told me to bestmail. And once I remembered, there was no going back. The days kept moving forward, and I didn't try to chase the past anymore. There's something strange that happens after you break free from the person who once defined your world. At first, there's pain, a hollow ache, but over time that emptiness becomes a space wide open, and waiting began to fill that space with things that were entirely mine. Mornings with silence and soft light walks that turned into discoveries, conversations with women who had lived through storms of their own and came out glimmering. It wasn't just healing, I was growing. Unwritten grace became more than a hobby. Orders began coming in from other cities. I was invited to showcase my work at a small women art festival. I stood at that booth, simple, modest, but glowing with authenticity, and felt proud, not for the sales, not even for the attention, but because I had created something that carried my truth, my struggle, my voice, my rebirth. A few weeks after the festival, I received a letter, not a message, a real physical letter. It was from Daniel's mother. She had heard the podcast, seen my work online. She wanted to apologize again, not for her son's choices, but for silence she had kept for years. She said she always suspected something was wrong, but didn't want to overstep and know, seeing the woman I'd become. She said she regretted not speaking up sooner. Her words touched me. She wasn't asking for reconciliation or forgiveness. She was just acknowledging. Sometimes acknowledgement is the deepest form of apology. But her letter included something else, something unexpected. Told me Daniel was struggling. Apparently, things hadn't gone well for him since the divorce. His relationship odors had repeated themselves. His performance at work declined. He had come isolated, increasingly defensive and frustrated with his own reputation, which had begun to sour in their professional and social circles. Word travels, especially in smaller communities. People started seeing through the charming surface, and that's when I realized something important. I didn't need revenge. Life had taken care of that for me, not in the form of suffering, but in the form of exposure. He had built his life on performance, crafted versions of himself for each audience, but eventually masks slip. People pay attention, and when they start connecting the dots, the truth has a way of catching up, no matter how carefully it's buried. I didn't celebrate us downfall. That wasn't who I was anymore, but I did feel validated. The woman who had once questioned her own sanity, who was gaslit into believing she was too emotional, too sensitive, or not supportive enough, now stood as proof that those weren't flaws, they were Sinzard flags that I had chosen to ignore but would never ignore again. One evening I hosted a small gathering at my apartment, just a few close friends, including Isla. We lit candles, played soft music, shared food, laughed loudly. No drama, no fake smiles, no tiptoeing around someone else's ego, just real, raw, beautiful connection. At some point, Isla pulled me aside. I'm proud of you, she said. Do you even realize how far you've come? I didn't know how to respond, so I just hugged her. She said something I'll never forget. You didn't just survive him, Anna, you outgrew him. That night, as I stood by the balcony watching The city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about all the versions of myself I had left behind: the girl who waited by the phone, the woman who justified coldness, the wife who quietly absorbed disrespect just to keep the peace. They were gone. I wasn't bitter, wasn't hardened. I was simply awakened. That was the greatest transformation of all. Sometime later, I was asked to give Egoist talk at a women's leadership event. It was nothing grand. Just a circle of women sitting in folding chairs, with notepads on their laps, but it was sentiment sincere and powerful. I shared my story, not with shame, but with pride. It told them how sometimes healing looks like starting over with trembling hands. Show forgiveness isn't for others, but for yourself. How walking away doesn't mean failure, it means choosing peace over performance. Afterward, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. I thought I was crazy, she said, but listening to you, I feel seen. That moment was worth every tear I had cried. Every night I had laid awake, wondering if I was the problem, every apology I had given for things that weren't my fault, because now had come what I once desperately needed, and that is a kind of justice no courtroom can offer. Now when I think about Daniel, I don't feel hate. I feel distance, like a country I once visited and realized I never wanted to live. And Naif, he ever hears my name now, I hope he feels not regret. Would be too easy. I hope he feels the absence of Mabiko's losing a woman who gave everything with honesty, who loved with patience, and who fought silently for a relationship that didn't deserve her. That is a loss no one ever truly recovers from. And me, I am finally living fully, fiercely, freely, not as someone's wife, not as someone's second choice, not as someone's ghost, but as myself, Anna. A woman who rose, a woman who remembered, a woman who wrote her own ending. Thanks for listening.